Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of My Take on China. In the West, it's barely receiving a mention, but in China it's front page news on a regular basis. China has done something the US never expected it to do. It's done it faster, cheaper, more efficiently, and on time. I'm talking about space exploration. The Wolf Amendment was, even according to usual China hawks, the Center for Strategic International Studies, a bad idea. It created a law where it's illegal for NASA to work with China in anything to do with space exploration. To understand how crazy this is, the USA even allowed Russia to collaborate with NASA at the height of the Cold War on the Apollo-Soyuz missions, and then also during the Cold War invited Russia to be part of the International Space Station, the ISS. This largesse led to a very highly embarrassing moment for the USA when in 2022 they had no way of getting their own scientists back from the ISS, and they needed to rely on a lift from Russia, even after the US had sanctioned almost every aspect of Russia's economy. And that was another thing that was barely covered in Western media, but where it was covered, it was described as a rare act of cooperation, not something Russia had been doing a long time. The entire purpose of the Wolf Amendment was to prevent technology transfer which might give China an unfair advantage. China describes it as an unfortunate decision, but one which created an opportunity for them to strive ahead on their own. And strive ahead is exactly what they've done. There are constant comparisons made by people who say US protectionist moves against semiconductors have caused China to rush forward with developments towards self-reliance. And those comparisons are equally valid with space exploration. China has developed a self-reliance and is now cooperating with other countries in the field such as Venezuela and Azerbaijan, countries the USA wouldn't consider cooperation with. And just like China's economy, which is constantly predicted to collapse, China's space ventures are constantly predicted to fail. In 2018, The Economist almost gleefully reported that an out-of-control space station, Chinese space station, will soon fall to Earth. What actually happened was some space debris, albeit rather large debris, re-entered the atmosphere and fell into the ocean in the way that it was anticipated to re-enter the atmosphere and fall into the ocean. What wasn't part of the story was the very fact that China has a space station up there at all. Not only that, it's had one for several years. 2011 they started talking about this, and they exchanged 3 scientists just last week who'd been there for 6 months, and another 3 will go up there for another 6. But the space station isn't the entire story. There's more, a lot more. It's very well known in China, but perhaps less well known in the USA and the Anglosphere, that China sent a landing craft to the dark side of the moon. They also brought back moon rocks and have shared their findings in scientific papers that NASA can read but can't contribute to. Not because China won't let them, but because their own protectionist laws forbids them from cooperating in case China gets an advantage from it. It gets really exciting when we learn what else is happening. And some of it was announced at a conference in China just last week. Again, a conference that barely created a ripple in Western media, so consumers in the USA and friends can be forgiven for still thinking that China is way behind the West, way behind the USA. But before looking at China's goals, let's take a look at the USA's recent achievements. In September 2020, the USA's Artemis project announced it would send robotics to the moon in the next year, and people back there by 2024. They plan to have people living on the moon by the end of the decade. And the announcement, in a typical burst of political correctness, said they also plan to send the first woman up there and the first person of color. What media and the Artemis project have neglected to tell us is that the first deadline, robotics by next year, has not been achieved. The new projected landing time for robotics has been delayed 3 years until November 2024. The second deadline will not be met either, as the first manned flights are now scheduled for December 24, but they'll orbit and not land. The first crewed moon landing is now scheduled for 2025 on a date that hasn't yet been advised. Perhaps cooperation with China might help them out here. One thing China has proven it can do is stick to its scheduled program. In 2011, China announced it would launch and assemble a space station between 2020 and 2022. In April 2021, the first module was sent to space, and in October 2022, the last module was put into place, spot on time. In 2007, it was announced that China would launch a robotic lunar module before 2020. It landed the first one in 2019, and it would collect samples from the moon in 2020. On December the 16th that year, the module containing rocks from the surface of the moon landed back on Earth. Another schedule met on time. Now China has projected it will have people on the moon by 2030, but before that landing, there will have been several exploratory expeditions, some of which will establish habitation for the humans that are coming later. They will also send 2 missions to collect samples from asteroids and 1 mission to collect samples and return with them from Mars. The current load capacity of the Long March rockets that China uses is 25 tons, and they're developing a new rocket with a 150-ton capacity. Also, research is ongoing and a plan is in place to change the path of an asteroid tens of millions of kilometers away so that we can learn how to avoid the probability or possibility of a near-Earth asteroid strike. This is something Hollywood has managed to do, but NASA hasn't yet. These are exciting times for China's space exploration agencies, but wouldn't it be great if they could be shared, not just with NASA, but with the general public, who it seems don't get informed of what's really happening in China, just in case they ask questions about why China can do this in a timely manner and on budget when the USA can't. A Time magazine article from 2021 states the US and China should be working together. The US could invite Chinese crews to the ISS, and the moon landing could be a joint cooperative venture, not a race. And while all this is true and great, in a classic case of US exceptionalism, the article states it can only happen under US leadership. It really is time that China was recognized as being one of the leaders in this field, not an also-ran who gets invited along as a token gesture like a person of color. But until China's space program starts to get proper coverage in Western media, people will continue to mistakenly believe that only the US could lead in this field. How wrong they are. Thanks once again for watching, and please don't forget to like, share, and if you haven't already done so, consider subscribing, as I am trying to get China's achievements to a wider audience, and a subscription will help you get notified when I do so. See you next time.